Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We call the Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, December 13th into session. Can I get a roll call, please?
Sorry. My computer is acting up. Okay. Commissioner Damon. Here. Commissioner Conroy.
Here.
Commissioner Evans.
Here.
Vice Chair Reamer.
Here.
And Chair Hernandez.
Present.
Everyone's present.
Okay, we have a new agenda, a revised agenda, I suppose. Can you talk about that before we hop in? We need,
It's not revised. It's not revised.
Uh,
The agenda.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yep.
should we go through and approve the agenda and move on until we get to the item and then discuss the reasons for the potential continuance?
Thank you, Tom. I think that's a great idea.
Stop.
Good. With that, I will move to approve the agenda as written.
Second.
Vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Agenda approved.
All right, agenda's approved. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes.
Now, we got a new version. Can somebody tell me what changed?
We have a revised minutes. If you can look at that on page 2, I accidentally put January 13th, 2016, and it's supposed to be December. So I just made the change. Vice Chair Reamer pointed that out to me earlier today, so I apologize. So that's the only change.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Therefore, I move to approve the minutes dated November 29th.
Second.
Can I get a vote?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Minutes are approved. Now it's time for everybody's favorite session, Planning Manager's Report.
Well, I apologize at this point because Jill's not here, and I wanted her here,
Sorry.
but she had to go. You're missing a page in the memo, so we're getting you the a missing page on the memo
Nice.
regarding the continuance issue. So I will start off, even though in her absence, to officially welcome her as the new planning manager and put that out for the record for the community and you. I think it's been out now, but I can tell you, one, for very selfish reasons, I'm excited. But beyond that, I'm excited because Jill has proven over the last really 18 months or so to be an incredibly gifted individual, a person who is really committed to the community and working with community members to try to improve and processes. And I think we've just seen a small piece of what she's been able to achieve with the general plan work so far, and expanding that into the broader spectrum of the planning functions beyond that, and the permitting processes and the architecture review processes will only be, I think, even greater. So join me, please, in welcoming Jill
So sorry.
when she gets back.
We'll reserve our welcome for her return.
Beyond that, yeah, we are looking at this point, we are anticipating that, well, given, so let me put it this way, depending on what you do with the item on 555 Poplar, we would be looking at cancellation of the first meeting in January due to a lack of items. So depending on your action, we'll withhold a formal response as to whether we will have an agenda items for that meeting or not. At this point, without the continued item to that meeting, we would not look at at having one at that point. We are looking at late in January having a planning directors meeting with a couple of small additions to homes and remodels of homes, and those will be appropriately noticed and moving through. We are in the process at this point of looking at scoping and putting together the work and an RFP for the environmental impact report for Mr. Jameson's hotel project, to identify the consultant to begin the work of preparing the EIR. Mr. Jameson is working, I've seen the working drawings for revisions based on commission and community input. Obviously, that will go through a very public process and move forward with that. I will say that we have had some other conversations with other property owners around, and I'll withhold discussing those too much, but another plan development may be coming forward in the very near future for some sort of filing, which would include also EIR work as well. So that seems to be moving afoot. With regard to the general plan, we do have a GPAC meeting this coming Thursday, so we welcome the community and particularly those involved at the Planning Commission to please participate if you possibly can, as well as the rest of the community. And with that, I think I will leave the rest as is. You're seeing several of the items and conversations, so we will kind of, I'll stop my conversation at that point.
No public comment.
Does staff want to talk about the... Sure.
Again,
Sorry, it's my fault.
so today we received a call and email from the applicant, who I do see in the audience here, Paul, requesting continuance of the item. Are you still requesting continuance, Paul, or are you here? Okay. We've provided you with, unfortunately, part of the memo. You're missing the second page, which is what Jill was heading out to look at. But, and while I think it's important, the basic question is a policy question. Yep. Did we find the?
No, I'm sorry.
All right, do you have the full thing?
No.
All right, well, she's making copy. In any event, your first page sort of outlines a lot of the conversation and discussions and contact that we have had with the applicant. The second page continued on with additional conversations, including as late as December 12th, I believe, in terms of some conversations. The bottom line for staff is that this has been sort of languishing out since April, when you last heard this. And we felt it was time to move forward to get some form of action on the item and to ultimately look at removing the story poles and the things out there. So, sorry, I've been able to delay this as much as possible, Jill. You know, you ever see that that when you're on camera and they're saying make it longer, make it longer. Sorry, folks, that's what I've been doing. So I wanted you to see this. So, in a nutshell, the applicant has requested continuance. We believe that ample opportunity has been provided to make revisions and modifications, that ample opportunity and notice was given both last month and our last meeting and into this month with this. And for the record, we have no intention of changing our position or revising this based on any revisions that may be submitted by the applicant or changes made by the applicant at this point. We kind of feel like we've evaluated and run through the process, and the basic issues will remain the same regardless. This leaves us in 2 points where the applicant may choose to withdraw the application and start over if they want to redesign. You may continue with the hearing tonight, and the attorney has been apprised of this, or you may continue this item to the one of the 2 January meetings of your choice, either the 10th or the 24th. And those are all on the table for at least 2 of those are on the consideration for you, and 1 additional one for the applicant to decide how he wishes to proceed.
I'm going to look to my 2 more experienced commission members here for guidance on this.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that at this point in time, even if we deny it, it means we have to talk about it. So the question is, since staff is prepared to talk about this, but the applicant is not, we kind of have to look at what the options are. I mean, we could, in effect, deny it, but if we do, have we done due diligence by just not hearing the applicant? Or 2, I said, no, can we accept the request to postpone to some other date? So, I mean, I'd like to kind of flip those issues and see what my fellow commissioners have to say, given kind of those strange options. Because even if we deny it, which I think is one thing that was suggested by Mr. Doherty, to me, there has to be a record among us that kind of goes through the rationale for that. So we would have to give it a hearing. I think I could be wrong in that, but at least that's my feeling here. So let's have some feedback amongst us and kind of see which way we want to go.
Yeah, and I think the question is, do we hear it tonight and make a decision, or do we continue it? Right? I mean, it's not a, what you know, this log of communication and frankly, Mr. McGregor's appearance here tonight leads me to believe that this is not a surprise that we're having a hearing on his item tonight. And so I don't see any reason to continue this any further. Okay, that's my feeling.
Don, Allison?
Yeah, I think those are good points. We should discuss the item tonight. I think there are many good reasons to go ahead and discuss it.
Do we need to ask our counsel about this at all?
I think they've spoken with counsel, but I'm seeing a head nod for those of you who aren't on camera or can't see our attorney on camera.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the agenda.
It's on the agenda, so
so
it's no issue.
we plow ahead.
And I don't see any evidence of any kind of extenuating circumstances. I mean, I do see fairly well documented trail. The meeting wasn't a surprise. and the agenda was posted on the city's website in a timely manner. I'm curious about the affidavit on December 5th. Can somebody speak to the mention of the affidavit?
That's just a reference when an applicant posts a site notice, they provide us with an affidavit saying they've done that.
Okay.
And so that was just one of the communications that we had with the
So
applicant.
the applicant posted a notice for the meeting, so he knew
Yes.
that it was going to happen.
And then brought in an affidavit to indicate that he had done that.
I don't see any reason to continue. I think we're going to hear the item. Okay, so that's the item on the agenda. Do we have a presentation from staff? Paul, this isn't the time.
No, this is not.
This is not the time right now. We're going to go ahead and hear the staff. We'd like to hear the staff report, Paul, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This site is located at the intersection of Poplar Street and Highway 1. It's surrounded, okay.
Sorry, we decided that we were going to do the side projector here for better viewing. We got some feedback that it was hard to see on the screen, so we're just trying something a little different and hope to get your feedback actually after this meeting to see how you like it.
So the site is surrounded on the north by a single-story house and a duplex, two-story duplex, on the east by a single-story house, and on the south across Poplar by vacant lot, and on the west by Highway 1. The Planning Commission previously considered this project on April 26, 2016. At that time, the applicant was proposing a 2,386 square foot single-story duplex with one attached two-car garage and one detached two-car garage. A 10-foot wide driveway located along the westerly property line provided access to the garages, and the project included a 6-foot sound fence attached to a low retaining wall. At that meeting, the Planning Commission expressed serious concern regarding the proposed project design and indicated that fundamental changes were needed to achieve a more livable environment, to reduce pavement, improve access and circulation, and provide well-designed open space that is shielded from traffic noise. The Commission suggestions included flipping the site plan to place the driveway on the east side of the site, exploring a two-story option, and considering a single-family residence rather than a duplex. The Commission indicated a willingness to consider variances if a more livable design could be provided. The Planning Commission indicated concern about the proximity of the site to the site access to the intersection of Poplar Street and Highway 1, and the challenges that this presents in regard to safe site access. The Planning Commission requested additional detail regarding street improvements across the site frontage to address this issue. The commissioners expressed concern regarding the appearance of the sound fence from Highway 1 and concern about its effectiveness in reducing noise. And the commission requested that the applicant explore additional alternatives for addressing noise. The commission indicated that the open space was not well designed or highly usable, and that a more detailed landscape plan was needed for the open space areas. The commission questioned how the proposed retaining wall on the east, north, and west sides of the property would affect drainage, and indicated that the drainage plan generally lacked adequate information. The discussion included concern that doors facing west and southwest were not adequately protected from wind and rain. So staff conveyed this feedback to the applicant in very clear terms so that the applicant was aware of the Planning Commission's concerns in regard to this project. In response, the applicant submitted a revised project. The revised design eliminates 2 garage parking spaces, provides private open space for each unit along the easterly property line. It insets the entrance to Unit A to protect it from weather. It replaces the sound fence with a good neighbor fence and includes a revised preliminary drainage plan. The architectural style and materials remain the same, and architecture is not addressed further in this presentation in that it's not a key issue for this project. The applicant did not provide engineering details indicating how safe access to the site would be provided, has not pursued a fundamental redesign of the project, and has not explored the design options suggested by the Planning Commission. The applicant's proposed design makes only marginal improvements in the location of the private open space. Despite elimination of 2 garage parking spaces, the amount of pavement hasn't been reduced. Vehicular circulation remains very tight. The small detached garage continues to provide a substandard setback, and one of the parking spaces continues to be substandard in depth. The proposed project requires a setback variance to reduce the garage setback from 10 feet to 5 feet, and a parking design variance to reduce the depth of one of the parking spaces from 19 feet to 16.5 feet. The project also requires a parking exception to reduce the required parking from 4 garage spaces to 2 garage spaces. In order to approve the proposed variances and the parking exception, the Planning Commission must make 3 findings shown on this slide. And in order to approve the parking exception, the Commission must also make the 4th finding shown on this slide. Staff does not believe that all of these findings can be made for the project. The first finding is in regard to exceptional and extraordinary circumstances, and staff believes that this finding can be made. There are clearly exceptional conditions associated with this site. Its triangular shape, its narrow frontage on Poplar Street, and its proximity to Highway 1 set it apart from most other parcels located in the R2 district. In regard to variance finding number 2, staff believes that this finding cannot be made. Granting of the requested variances and parking exception is not necessary for the development of the site. The Planning Commission has suggested other design options and uses which the applicant has not explored, including a 2-story design placing the access drive on the east side of the site and a single-family residence. The applicant has viable options available for development of the site in conformance with the zoning code, and the proposed variances are not needed to preserve property rights. In regard to the 3rd finding, staff believes that this finding cannot be made. The Planning Commission raised concerns regarding the project design, including the design of the open space, the amount of pavement, and provision for safe site access. These design issues have not been adequately addressed by the revised project. The revised design makes marginal improvements in the design of the required open space, but it does not shield open space for Unit B from highway noise. It doesn't provide a detailed landscape plan for the open space areas. It does not reduce the amount of pavement on the site and does not improve on-site circulation. In addition, the project does not include details regarding street improvements requested by the Planning Commission to demonstrate how safe pedestrian and vehicular access can be provided to the site. Given these deficiencies, the project as proposed may be injurious to persons residing or working in the neighborhood or detrimental to the public welfare. In regard to the 4th finding, staff believes that the 4th finding, which is required for the proposed parking variance, cannot be made. The applicant has not explored viable options for duplex or single-family development of the site in conformance with the zoning code. Therefore, the project is not as nearly in conformance as reasonably possible with zoning code parking requirements. In the absence of the findings supporting the proposed variances and parking exceptions, the project does not conform to the zoning code, which is the LCP implementation plan, and without zoning code conformance, the project is not consistent with the local coastal program. In conclusion, the current proposal attempts to squeeze too much onto this site, and in the absence of meaningful exploration of a more fundamental redesign, it's unclear whether a duplex is appropriate for the site. A single-family residence, which is an allowed use in the R2 district, may fit better in this location. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission deny the application PDP 1541 for the coastal development permit, architectural review, setback and parking design variances, and parking exception based on the findings presented in Exhibit A of the draft resolution. This concludes staff recommendation. Oh, excuse me, and one more item. Staff is providing this evening a revised resolution that corrects minor errors, and the memo identifies which pages are corrected. Call your attention to pages 6, 7, 13, and 14, and the minor errors are shown in red, underline, and strikeout. And I would also recommend that the Planning Commission, in addressing this issue and making a decision on the project, provide some direction to the applicant regarding the story poles. We have received a number of inquiries about the story poles being up so long, and the Commission may wish to give direction to the applicant in regard to the story poles.
Thank you, Carol. I know staff have invested a lot of time in putting this together. Any questions from my fellow commissioners?
I'd really like, Carol, really compliment you on, I thought you very articulately captured our comments when we first heard this project. Thank you.
Okay, no questions. I'm going to open it up to the applicant for a moment, if he's requested to speak.
A little bit perturbed about that, because actually most of the times I get back sooner. So the question I had is I never received a copy of the staff report until I had to go in on Monday and get it. Okay, in the past, they've been sent to me, they've been emailed to me, but I was not afforded to get this report until Monday. So, you know, I really haven't had the necessary time to be able to answer some of the questions that are on here. But, you know, I can back up and I can go to the previous meeting. I reviewed the minutes of the April 26th meeting, and there was a lot of comments made between the commissioners up there, and let alone Mr. Ambrose. And so I can start out with some of the conditions or some of the requirements that you folks were looking for. So as it starts, Mr. Conroy was looking for water direction, survey and spot elevations. And at his point in time, he said it was not difficult to find the findings for the variances on this project. Little concerned about the round front and roof. He said without precedence, it hasn't been done in this neighborhood. Well, there's other projects in this town that are. There's one on the corner of Poplar and Railroad, which Ann Guston designed many years ago. Actually, Mr. Hernandez has some round features on his house. I built houses in various areas in Miramar, 426 Miramar Drive, that has round features and so forth, so I wouldn't call that a precedence. Exposed entrances was another one of Mr. Conroy's concerns. Yeah, there's exposed entrances, and we've taken care of that in this particular drawing because Mr. Evans brought up that the door for Unit A was potential for weather intrusion and stuff like that. So we recessed the door in that particular thing. Also, Mr. Conroy believes there is adequate open space. And then his last request is more landscaping was desired, but not enforceable. Okay, and Mr. Hernandez, the variance, not unreasonable, not concerned about it, disagreed with the open space, and maybe a little more architectural detail and more usable open space. Mr. Evans asked to give Mr. McGregor something to move forward with, which I have at this point in time. Fencing to contain people, kids and so forth. Primary issue with Mr. Evans was ingress and egress to get onto Poplar, which has been addressed by the way the driveways are done and the garages are done, because personally, I don't want my tenants, which I intend to keep this building, to back out onto Poplar and create problems. That's not what I want. I want people to get in and out safely. Every other house on that street, people back out onto Poplar. And if you drive up and down, you'll see how the cars are pointed towards the garage and they back out, including the neighbors next door to me. Now, at this point in time, I believe they back in so they can get out safely. And as far as view shed goes with the neighbors, their fence is too tall, number one. There was a cypress tree that was removed recently that probably blocked a lot of their view to get back out on Poplar. He also mentioned, Mr. Evans also mentioned the detached garage seemed a little quirky. I don't have a problem connecting that to the house, but the reason why the detached garage was put there, because it's allowed to get deeper into the setbacks without having a 20-foot rear setback. So that's why that was proposed at that point in time. He also didn't like the look of the sound wall, which I can agree with. You know, I want things to look good there also. You know, I mean, a good neighbor fence is essentially what's been done up and down that corridor. If you look at the condo project, Amesport Landing, they just replaced their fence with a good neighbor fence. Tom Carey built a duplex the next street up for me that has a good neighbor fence. Same type of open space area and so forth. Mr. Roman, which is not here tonight, he wanted more clarity on the open space, and he would like to have seen the garage connected to Unit B. Radius roof in the front and so forth, that was a question of his, and I explained to that at the time that since the Poplar portion and Highway 1 portion comes around on a radius, we had a certain setback right there, and that's why the house was radius at that point in order to conform with the setbacks. There was some mentions of redesigning it. That would be a problem, because if you do a redesign and you try to push the building closer to Highway 1, I have a minimum 10-foot setback on that side. So now if I'm going to put 10-foot setback on the other side to put a driveway in there and try to get in and out, it's not going to happen. These units will be even smaller, all right? I'm trying to create affordable housing. This isn't something, I want 2 stories where people have to go up and down stairs and stuff like that. And you know, when you go up higher in elevation, such as the duplex behind me, you catch more highway noise. You really do. There's more noise involved, noise travels up. I've had houses along Highway 1, and prime example is 426 Miramar Drive, which is actually county because it's on one side of Murata and on the other side of the highway. There was a few other comments, but then it came down to Mr. Ambrose, and Mr. Ambrose concluded with all your comments and his concerns, which were your concerns, were ingress and egress onto Poplar, drainage from the neighbor, and where it drained to, which would be the west side, which is shown on these plans at this point in time, maybe a sound wall alternative, more open space, and the concern about the median. The median is essentially not in my control because it's the civil engineer or the public works engineer from the city of Half Moon Bay, and I've had discussions with them. I brought them different alternatives, and Russ from Public Works actually drew up a little diagram, which you may have in your collection right here, to show what he wanted there. And then he also noted that, you know, you can do Caltrans number 28 or 29 to meet that achievement. So for me to do a lot of median designs and stuff like that, I shouldn't be doing this until I get some kind of direction or approval of what the house is gonna look like before I spend thousands of dollars designing medians that aren't gonna be used. It's money not being well spent. So, that's where I sit, and then there was also, letters to, Mrs. Hamilton concerning, her questions that were reflected in the package. And, I have a little concern right here. You know, when this project was first presented to you, it gave thumbs up from the planning department. Now, at this point in time, you guys were only mainly asking for drainage and a few other things. Now it's become thumbs down. So that kind of bothers me. You know, when a planning department goes and says, hey, we like this looks good, and we'll make this thing work, and then all of a sudden it turns around because of a few comments, I don't get it. So maybe you guys can inform me what happened there. It'd be nice to know.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
I have one other comment card from Carlos Ruiz.
So, my name is Carlos Ruiz. I'm a civil engineer on the east side of this construction that's proposed. A couple of things, I attended the last review meeting in April, and a couple of things that weren't mentioned either from Paul or the committee that had been requested were a fire department review, which I don't know whether it was done for the property, a Caltrans traffic assessment, and a couple of weeks ago there was a meeting set aside for doing a traffic study in that area because of the light, so I don't think that has been done either. As Paul mentioned, in terms of the drainage, I guess the current drawings don't reflect any of that, or that I saw, in terms of how the drainage on my side would come over to the other side. And those are the concerns that I have with the current design.
The new plans that have been given to you actually show more open space. They've changed some of the parking configurations to hopefully accommodate what you were anticipating as far as new parking regulations go. Let me add further to that. I live in a two-bedroom house, corner of Poplar and Third. I have a one-car garage with one additional parking space to the side of it. I can actually accommodate 4 cars in my driveway. So with a duplex, which is essentially 2 houses, I'm being held to a standard that's far and above and beyond what an apartment is being held to, or a duplex. And then as far as Mr. Ruiz's comment, as far as the drainage goes, that's also involved in that plan right there. I do pick up the water from his property and the other property, and I do forward it into my drainage pits, whatever you want to call them, containment. And then also there is a bubble that takes it towards Highway 1. And the flow from that goes from his house west, and then it also continues north. So I have addressed his drainage concerns. I really don't want his house to flood. His house sits lower than mine. And actually, if you take a good look at the plans, the overall height of the retaining wall has been dropped by about approximately 1 foot. And so there are knockouts, and there are 6-inch pipes in there to take his water if he ever does flood, and it goes into my containment area. And then if that fills up, and then it flows over into the Caltrans right-of-way, which goes west and it goes north from that particular site. And the open space, let me add, it was incorporated into the back of Unit B. And if you take a look at the plans on Unit A, we put it to the back of the property. for private open space. There was a common open space issue. I don't know if that really pertains to this. This is not a large apartment complex, and some of the rules as far as open space are vague, and that was brought up last time. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to look carefully around the room and see if anybody else has any other comments, and if not, I'll go ahead and close this up. And return it to my planning commissioners.
Can we ask questions of staff first, perhaps, or so on? Yeah. So this is a legal lot. It's a buildable lot, correct? And
That's correct.
so the question, I guess, is if a project came to planning, that met the zoning standards but did not require a variance, would that come to the planning commission, or could you approve that?
It would likely come to the planning commission if it were a duplex. It's possible that if it were a single-family house, the director would deal with it through a director's hearing.
Okay, so that, it's not necessarily would come to the planning commission unless there were something either unique or there were a variance that we'd have to approve. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. The variance and the parking exception, I believe, can be approved by the director, but the variance would have to come to the planning commission.
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify, Carol. I heard two things. So if it was a duplex, would the duplex normally come to the planning commission, or is that something that would go to the planning director for approval?
I think that it could go to the planning director for approval. It would be, the director could send it to the planning commission, or could, depending on the nature of the project.
So it would be a judgment issue.
That's correct.
That's typical for duplexes, okay. But it's definitely coming to us because of the variances.
It definitely is coming to you because of the variances.
Just one more question. There's at least several, quote, manufactured homes in that area. Would there be any constraint on building a manufactured home on that lot if it met whatever conditions were in the zoning code?
There are some special conditions in the zoning code, but the city treats a manufactured home like it would any single-family residence. I think by law that is the case. There are a few special requirements, but they're not difficult to meet.
Okay.
Yes, that would be, a manufactured home would be treated, if it were designed appropriately, would be treated like any proposal.
Okay. Last question is the sound issue. Are there ordinances in the zoning code that in effect says house, if it's adjacent to something like either 92 or Highway 1, has to be shielded from sound?
There's nothing in the zoning code that requires that.
Okay, so it's buyer beware in effect. No,
There is a noise element, outdoor guideline, noise compatibility guideline of 60 decibels for outdoor spaces. And that is the reason that the protection of the private open space was an important issue for this project.
okay. Thank you.
Well, I don't have any questions for staff, but we're into discussion now, right?
Yeah. Well, I'd opened it up for questions before, so that's.
Yeah.
I'd
I mean, I know it's a little here and there, but so at the end of our meeting on April 26th, well, not the end of the meeting, but the end of the hearing on this item, our then planning director, Bruce Ambo, read a list of like 8 bullet point items. And I listened to the recording today, and The first one was more details on the entry exit to Poplar. More details on the drainage interface with the adjacent property, which I believe the plans show. I am skeptical that the way the plans show the water being the bubbler or the direction of that flow is either appropriate or even possible based on the fact that they're draining onto Caltrans property. But as far as the interface with the neighbor's property, that was adequately addressed on the plans. The alternatives to the sound wall, which was addressed. Closer look at the street improvements with a need to adequately show where the drainage goes, the bubbler, but this also refers to the curb and sidewalk and gutter that weren't shown on the previous submittal and are not shown in the current set of drawings. Bruce at the time noted that the Planning Commission had exhibited, as we did, a willingness to work with the variances that were being proposed at the time, with an eye on more usable open space, which I know is something that you addressed, Rick. And then clarity on the city engineer, from the city engineer on median improvements. Rick, you had specifically addressed something in writing. And while we don't have a dedicated memo from the city engineer, in the staff report notes that the deputy city engineer did comment on the need to have some sort of raised median island. So there were a handful. Oh, and the landscape plan, which is required for multifamily housing to have a landscape plan that meets the requirements of the water use and landscape ordinance. It's not just a landscape plan, but it's one that is in full compliance with the water use and landscape ordinance. I mean, that's a chunk of code right there. So of these 6 or 8 or 9 things that we were looking for, I see 4 of them that weren't addressed. And with his comments tonight, Mr. McGregor suggested he doesn't want to address them because he doesn't feel it's the appropriate time, or he doesn't want to go through that process and bear the burden of the expense of those actions, specifically the street improvements and the median stuff in the street. But those components are really critical, I think, to at least personally my review of this project. This is a treacherous intersection. Having a stoplight there and a crosswalk is great. It does help some of the flow. I know as we both live in the area, Rick, it has made crossing Highway 1 easier, but it's still nasty. There are no sidewalks. These are really crosswalks that go to nowhere. There's no real frontage because of the way this curves in what is essentially a turning lane. And so without further clarification of where a sidewalk may end, where a gutter may end, how this is going to interface with the property next door or future roadway improvements, I don't see how we can make a finding that this project conforms to our to the zoning code. I think Carol, staff in general, did a great job putting together very clear findings for denial. And I haven't heard anything else from the public comment tonight or in my review of the staff report and drawings, that leads me to take issue with any of those findings for denial.
John, you were at the last meeting. Do you want to?
All right, okay, on John's insistence. I do see those are all really good points that I wasn't at the meeting in April. I wasn't on the planning commission, but I find it really hard to see how a duplex fits on such a small lot. Maybe it could work as a single-family home, like at 3rd and Poplar. There's a pretty new house. It's on a very small lot. I don't know the details of that house, like how many square feet it is, but it does work on a really small lot. So maybe this could, in a future time, a single-family home might work better on such a small lot.
That's John.
With Mr. Conroy, I also support the staff's findings for denial. I guess I just need to make a general statement that just looking at how this project is going to look, it's going to look as though Poplar Avenue kind of turns the corner and is another street in front of this little duplex. That's just the way it's going to look. And if I had to live there and that was my front yard and I put my lawn chair out there next to Highway 1, the demand for housing is so high here that I guess I'd be willing to pay that, but that seems to be a shame to just make the conciliation for the livability. I feel like our zoning code works generally for most of the parcels in this district, and it doesn't work very well for this particular corner. It's very odd. And for a project to be held to the standards of a corner lot with setbacks and daylight planes and things like that seems inappropriate for this particular parcel. And it seems like there's lots of options that this applicant or any person that had this property could be looking at to make a more livable duplex or single-family home. And I haven't seen any of that, and it hasn't really changed much from what we saw before. But again, I come back to the staff report that I agree that there's no evidence specifically to support findings to approve this project.
Have any other comments, Les? So,
Sorry, Rick, I think, John, I think you make a good point, and I think you made a really eloquent point at our last meeting in April about this, is that the applicant is requesting variances to try to squeeze several things into this site. And one of the things you brought up, John, is, well, if you're asking for variances, really ask for variances. You know, take the opportunity to make those variances count, rather than little corner, you know, get an extra 5 feet here, an extra couple corners there, or reduce the parking exemption, because you know, I would disagree slightly, Allison, with what you said, in that I don't think this duplex fits, but I think a duplex could fit with a more creative and potentially a more creative approach to stretching those boundaries, stretching those variances on what is a unique site. So that's.
those are really good comments. To your list of 8 items, I think there's one item which goes back to the sound wall, which, going back to our original meeting, there is a noise ordinance, or there's some guidelines on noise, which is why the sound wall was originally proposed. And during the hearing, one of the items that was discussed was possibly making soundproofing materials, or having the house have more soundproofing in the design. I didn't see any changes to that effect in the design, in the redesign. Were there any?
Staff had originally included a condition in the permit that required sound attenuation of the building with sound-rated windows, which would provide sufficient reduction for the noise levels at that location.
Okay, great. So, going through this, I agree. I read the findings, staff's report and the recommendation. I don't see any issue, any reason why we can't support staff report. So, are we ready for a vote?
Sure.
Can I get a motion?
Everybody's looking at me. Should I make a motion? Let me get this correct here. Let me get the right one. I move that the Planning Commission deny PDP 15041, an application for a coastal development permit, architectural review, setback, and driveway and parking design variances, and a parking exemption to offer the construction of a single-story duplex at 555 Poplar Street, based upon the amended findings and evidence distributed tonight and herein incorporated as Exhibit A of our resolution.
Do I have a second?
I second that.
Can we get a voice vote?
Commissioner DeMond,
Yes.
Commissioner Conroy,
Yes.
Commissioner Evans,
Yes.
Vice Chair Reamer,
Yes.
and Chair Hernandez.
Yes.
Motion passes as written, 5-0.
One point of clarification, Carol, you brought up the story poles on the project. What is now that we've made a decision, what is the status of the story poles and what needs to happen with those?
I think it would be appropriate for the commission to ask the applicant to remove them.
Can I make a motion, or have somebody make a motion to have the story poles brought down, or can we just ask you to take them down, Paul? Thank you.
At this point, I imagine it's a code enforcement
Yeah.
issue.
Okay.
Great.
Do we need a formal motion? I mean, what's the process
No, I
here?
don't think so.
Okay, great.
We're
Okay.
good.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is PDP 16067, an application for a heritage tree removal permit for the removal of 76 heritage Monterey pines between Wingfoot Road and Miramontes Point Road, and 5 other Monterey pines along Wingfoot Road within the PUD.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. As you mentioned, this is this project involves a heritage tree removal permit for the removal of 81 Monterey pine trees. And a little background, the Ocean Colony Association submitted an application for the tree removal. It initially included the 76 trees along the strip of land between Miramontes Point Road and Wingfoot Road. Later on, a revised arborist report was submitted, and at that time, the applicant decided to add an additional 5 Monterey pine trees within the roadway island that's further up Wingfoot Road. So to give you an idea, maybe we can dim the lights a little bit. Just to give you an overview of the area, it includes 2 distinct areas within Ocean Colony where the tree removals are proposed. And that, the small strip of land in the red on the bottom there, as well as the roadway island up to the northwest, both within Ocean Colony. Across Miramontes Point Road is Kenyatta Cove, and then here's Highway 1, just to give you an overview as to where the tree removals, the trees currently are. So here's a photograph from the inside on the Wingfoot Road side of the narrow strip of land where the 76 Monterey pine trees are currently. And as you can see, the trees are, the canopies have certainly have deteriorated, and most, these trees are in pretty bad shape. I thought since, given the narrowness of this property, a quick video was appropriate. So maybe we'll, you mind tapping the play button here? Real quick, it just, I thought it made sense. Not that I'm any expert in videos, but
I didn't get a movie on the flight, so.
I didn't bring any popcorn either, so sorry about that. But as you can see, there's a 6-foot solid fence. Some of these trees are actually dead, and then excessive cones, usually a sign indicative of trees deteriorating, diseased. Even from the non-arborist perspective, they're in fairly bad shape. There's a dead one right there. And the area so it's roughly, it varies, roughly 6 feet, but then in some areas it's 8 feet wide, the strip of land, and then goes all the way down to the tot lot, if you know where that is in Ocean Colony. So. So this. All right. So here's the this particular area. The applicant would like to replant this area with less trees, which makes sense given the amount of land that's available. They would like to replant the 76 trees with 36 Brisbane box in 24-inch box in size, 25 feet apart. And then fill in the areas between the new trees with New Zealand broadleaf shrubs. Moving on, this is the second location, the roadway island. And photograph isn't as good, but it still shows that the trees are in similar, poor shape. Towards the top of this tree, you can see the additional cones that are being produced, showing that sign of deterioration. Here's another shot of the same roadway island, the 5 trees that are proposed for removal. In this particular area would be replanted with Brisbane box again in 24-inch box, but the applicant would like to add some additional trees to this particular area. 10 trees would replace the existing 5. See, here's another. Now, as far as the justification for removal, the Planning Commission, and actually staff for that matter, when we're reviewing heritage tree removal permits, there needs to be, proper justification for removal. Whether is the tree dead or dying, diseased? Does it pose any hazard to the public safety? In this case, the applicant has provided an arborist report, which was included in your packet, that provided sufficient justification for the removal of the 81 trees, along with the photographs I provided. A lot of these trees do pose a substantial public safety risk, especially given some of maybe the storms that we're going to have this winter. The city's superintendent of public works, who is also a certified arborist, visited both sites, and he concurs with the conclusions made in the arborist report. So the number of replacements. The applicant proposes to replace the 81 trees with 71 Brisbane box trees in a 24-inch box size, as well as the New Zealand broadleaf shrubs. 36, as I mentioned before, in the narrow strip of land along Miramontes Point Road, 10 within the roadway island, and then 25 within 2 other parks within Ocean Colony, which gets us to 71 replacement trees. The Heritage Tree Ordinance does require a 1-to-1 replacement. So we have, within the resolution, condition B2, which requires an additional 10 trees to be planted for removal of the 81 trees. In regard to the phasing, the applicant would like to replant the roadway island as well as the narrow strip along Miramontes Point Road fairly quickly after removal of the existing trees out there. They have requested some additional time with the 35 additional replacement trees within other areas of Ocean Colony, and they've requested to replant those over the course of 5 years. Now, the tree ordinance doesn't specify a particular time frame for replacement, but staff felt that a quicker turnaround time for replanting of those trees was more appropriate. So we did add condition B3 that requires that the tree replacements take place within 2 years of the removal of the last tree, but no later than 3 years from the start of the tree removal. Now, in your staff report, the language of that condition indicated just what I mentioned, but we did neglect to add the last portion of that sentence in the condition B3. So staff is recommending that additional language be added to condition B3 within the draft resolution, including adding a comma, but no later than 3 years from the start of the tree removal. Now, alternatively, something that the Planning Commission may consider is instead of the added 2 conditions that were recommended, the Planning Commission could pursue alternative approaches. For example, phasing the removal and buying essentially it's a little more time, extending the time duration for both the removal and replacement. Additionally, on your agenda tonight, we are going to be discussing later on, tree ordinances, amendments, and possible considerations that the Planning Commission may have. With that, staff is recommending approval of the project with the added language to condition B3, and which would allow for the removal of the 81 Monterey pine trees and replacement. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, and also the applicant is here as well if you have any questions for them.
Any questions for staff?
Scott, did the code's unambiguous that a 1-for-1 replacement is required? Is the applicant? I didn't see it in the staff report. Is the applicant requesting a variance? Because the applicant does mention a variance in their letter, but it doesn't appear that they're requesting a variance, or at least the staff report doesn't make it clear that they're requesting a variance.
Yeah, you are correct that was mentioned in the letter that was provided to staff. Now, a variance is not a process that's within this portion of the municipal code. It is within Title 18. So there is no process for any sort of variance or exception to the 1-for-1 replacement.
Okay, so they were consciously submitting a number that was below the
That's correct, and the applicant may be able to go into more detail as to their intent on providing 71 replacement trees. We did have some conversations, and part of it is that we all agreed that it was more appropriate to decrease the amount of the trees that are out there currently within the narrow strip of land between Miramontes Point Road and Wingfoot Road. That spreading them out did make some more sense to provide for more larger canopy and different species. But as far as the variance goes, there is not a process out of Title 18 to allow for the Planning Commission to grant a variance for one-to-one replacement. Planning Commission may it may be more of a broader policy discussion that we are going to be discussing later on as far as amendments to the heritage tree ordinance.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted that clarification. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess it's a little confusing because right now we don't yet have the replanting plan, or just that they're going to be spaced out every 25 feet. and then they're going to go to the other parks in the area?
Yeah, that's correct. So the applicant did provide more of a prototypical planting plan for the area between Miramontes Point Road and Wingfoot Road. How we've structured the conditions is that the applicant will need to provide more detail on the planting plan to be reviewed by the community development director. They are proposing to plant 10 replacement trees within the roadway island, but then the 35 additional trees would need to be reviewed by staff before replanting those.
Okay, I have no questions. So we have a couple of comments, cards that have been submitted, and we have the applicant is here as well. Does the applicant wish to make any comments or address any of the other questions that have come up?
Good evening, commissioners and staff. First, to answer Tom's question. Tom, we originally did not want to replace all of the trees that were removed, but we were told that we could not submit an application unless there was provisions for replacing every one on a one-to-one basis. So that's why that was written up that way. For the past 8 years, my name is Michael Klass, and for the past 8 years, I've been the chairman of the Landscape Committee for Ocean Colony Homeowners Association. And I do appreciate all of the efforts from Scott and the other staff members in your planning department. And we're here tonight pretty much to discuss 3 particular items regarding the permit application. The removal of 81 dead or dying pine trees is a huge project for us. And because of the large expense and our other financial commitments in Ocean Colony, we have actually delayed this project for several years. The problem of falling limbs has now become a liability and risk issue for our homeowners, and also to the cars driving along Miramontes roads, which leads to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. It's already caused maintenance issues and repeated damage to our perimeter fences. For financial reasons, we had considered removing only 5 of the dead trees and 30 of the most severely diseased trees, which was brought up, just removing part of all the trees. However, the 3 arborists that we contacted and consulted all stated that the remaining trees were all diseased, dying, and would need to be removed at least within the next year or 2. Therefore, they felt it was much more reasonable and cost-effective to remove all of the trees at one time. It would thus also allow us to amend the soil, remove the stumps, and start a replanting process. Just removing trees here and there would not allow us to really begin any kind of a replanting program. Our first concern regarding this application is the requirement to replace all 72 heritage trees on a one-for-one basis. Although this policy is very well intentioned, many other Bay Area cities have recognized that this policy is not always realistic. Some cities recommend replacement based on the square footage of the planting area or what their planning department people consider reasonable. As noted in the staff report, the re-landscaping plan has us replanting 36 of these Brisbane botch trees on 45-inch centers. This is what was recommended by the arborists. Even though it is not optimal and would be rather crowded, we are trying to comply with the replanting guidelines and are willing to modify the plan and plant 45 trees on a 20-foot centers. That would then require us to plant an additional 27 trees, an additional cost to our association of nearly $10,000. These larger trees, the smaller 15-gallon trees, run around $80 to plant, whereas the 24-inch ones are almost $250 per tree. So it's quite an expensive project. In regard to the number of trees we would like the commissions to consider, first of all, the 76 trees were planted many, many years ago and were extremely overplanted in this very small 3 by 6 foot area. It's basically a wall of trunks rather than really trees. This crowding led to the poor growth, the stress, and this caused the bark beetle infestation and thus the ultimate demise of the trees. Now we are asked to pay for almost $30,000 for the removal of these trees and are also being held responsible for the huge cost of replacing trees that never should have been planted in the first place. Our plans also are to plant 140 New Zealand broadleaf trees in between these larger trees. Now, these trees are considered to be large shrubs and also considered to be trees, as they can be trained to be grown in trees, and they will grow over 20 feet in height. I've researched many of the tree removal and replacement policies of 5 different Bay Area cities, and the definition of a tree, for example, is different in every single policy. The official San Jose tree removal policy, for example, defines a tree as any plant or hedge that is over 6 feet tall. If that is the case and we were in San Jose, we would be actually replacing 3 times the number of trees than the requirement. The one-for-one replacement policy must be justifiable may be justifiable for a residence or a small business involving a small number of trees. There should, however, be a more flexible policy involving golf courses or large developments like Ocean Colony, in which we are constantly removing trees, pruning trees, and planting trees. Managing over 200 large trees is much more difficult than managing just 3 or 4 trees in a small residence. Our second concern is the size of the replacement trees. The guidelines call for 24-inch boxes, which, by the way, are currently being phased out in most of the wholesale facilities in the Bay Area. And because of the poor soil, the steep slope, and the very narrow slip, and the high winds in the area, our arborists recommended actually 15-gallon trees to be planted in some areas. They further stated that after 2 years, a 15-gallon tree, which is rapidly growing, will be equal in height to the 24-inch box trees, and will have a stronger root system and will be 1/3 the cost. Since the size of a tree in a 15-gallon container or 14-inch box may vary, some cities actually are now basing their replacement on the variety of the tree and the diameter of the trunk rather than on the size of the planting container. Our final concern is the timeline. This is a very expensive endeavor, an undue burden to the association and its residents. All of our association projects are actually based on 5, 10, 15, or even 30-year plans. Completing all of the replanting, if required, cannot be guaranteed in 2 years, as proposed by the planning department staff. We have allocated funds in our 2016 budget to pay for the tree removal and replanting of up to 45 to 50 trees along this fence line. However, we have no landscape plans or funds available to replant any more trees than that. For 2016 and 18, Ocean Colony is using all of its financial resources to pay for the current 3-year street repaving project, tot lot renovations, and sidewalk repairs. This takes precedent over any re-landscaping plans. Next year, if funds are still available, we are planning to re-landscape the Wingfoot Road Island, where 5 of the trees are being removed, and install 8 to 10 replacement trees. Thus, by the end of next year, we will have replanted 75% of the required trees that are being requested. Our future plans call for re-landscaping of our other 2 islands and perhaps being able to plant trees at the new Carnoustie 4 housing project, if and when it is approved. However, there are no landscape plans available at this time or funds allocated for any of these projects. A lot will depend on the progress and financing of our current association obligations. So in summary, in that handout that I gave you, there are some kind of summarized very briefly what we are requesting. We are first requesting the removal of the 76 dead trees along the Wingfoot Road fence. I think everybody's pretty much in agreement with that. And also the 5 trees in the Wingfoot Island, 2 of which are totally dead at this time. We are committed to replacing or replanting 36 of the box trees as requested by our arborist. However, we would be willing to increase that to 45 trees on a 20-foot center. This is crowding more than the arborist would like. However, it is doable, and that would increase the number of trees that we would be planting. As a result of the overpopulation of trees that were well beyond our control, we are also requesting a tree replacement plan calling for 50 trees rather than the 72. And this is one of the main reasons we wanted to bring this to the commission. It's not our fault that these trees were grossly overplanted. They're kind of like the trees when you come in on 92 along the cemetery. They're just a wall of tree trunks, which, if you had to replace all those, it'd be very difficult. We are agreeable to using 24-inch boxes in most areas, but we would like the option to use some 15-gallon sized trees in areas where the arborist feels that there is insufficient room or a very sharp incline. If you figure you've only got 6 feet and you're going to be putting a 2-foot wide planter in the middle of it, you've only got 2 feet on each side to try to establish a root ball. And this is a very windy area, and you're not going to get a very sturdy or nutritious tree there. If there is no variance as to the required number of trees that need to be replanted, we also would like a 4-year time frame rather than the 2-year. We can probably commit to planting maybe 75 to 80% of the trees within the first 2 years, but since we have all these other projects going on, there is no guarantee that we would have the funds available to do it. As the old adage goes and the old pun, money doesn't grow on trees, and certainly we have limitations within our budget. And finally, our association would appreciate consideration in the future for more flexible guidelines as to the tree removal and replanting policies in our area. Since we do have so many trees to deal with, this is an ongoing process, and it's very difficult to go ahead and get permits for every little time we have to make some amendments to the trees. Thank you again to everybody on the staff. Thanks to Scott, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. We have a few other people from Ocean Colony who might be willing to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Klaas. Do you have any questions? All right. Alan Alifano? And that's the only other comment card I have other than Michael's.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission and staff. My name is Alan Alifano. We've lived in Ocean Colony for almost 40 years now. And as Michael said, the developer grossly overplanted these pine trees years ago. And they were pretty for many years, but as you all know, with pitch canker and the other issues, they're dying out and they're no longer really viable trees, especially in this area. My son lives actually on Wingfoot, and I've spent some time there, and it does look pretty bad the way they are. Plus, it's a safety hazard. So I think the key tonight for you all, we would request, is to let us move forward with, and I'm part of the landscape committee with Michael, is put in the new trees, the large trees, a 24-inch box where we can on the Wingfoot area, and then also moving into the second year, finish the Wingfoot park area, and then going forward from there, give us a flexibility to redesign the other park areas within Ocean Colony and figure out where trees belong. Because in some cases, you can't just put in 5 or 10 trees willy-nilly, and it's just not going to look appropriate. So I would ask you for some flexibility tonight going forward. I think you can find that Ocean Colony will be very trustworthy in terms of following the plans we've submitted. And the other point Michael made, I think would really be helpful if, for us, for Ocean Colony, and for Ocean Colony partners with the golf course, because over the years, they've been taking out trees and replanting trees for many, many years since I've lived there. It'd be helpful if we could submit a long-term plan that staff could approve, and then we could just move forward and we could apprise staff as we finish the phases, as opposed to having to put these huge packets together to come here and take your time up with this. But we appreciate your flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other public comments, we'll close the public comment period and redirect back to my fellow commissioners.
Well, if you guys want to talk about management plans for large properties, stick around. You missed it last month. We had a good talk back then, too. There are some things that I really like to see here. I really like your choice of tree. It's a great tree. It's a great tree on the coast, and we've got a bunch of them that are now growing in downtown, in and around downtown, and they're growing well and fast, and they're going to have a great canopy. So it's a good choice. It's Is my time up? I'm going home. Okay. You know, looking at those trees and looking around town, a lot of these trees, a lot of these Monterey pines were planted 60 years ago, 40 years ago, 80 years ago, and they're dying. They're dying all over the place, and they're coming down in chunks, and in big, dangerous chunks. So there's no question in my mind that these trees should be removed, and not removed in a piecemeal fashion like had been contemplated as an original option, but they should be removed in their entirety. I really like the replanting plan. Planting those at 25-foot centers is the right thing to do, and the low screening shrubs in between are a good choice. It's not a plant choice that I've seen a lot on the coast, but it's certainly an appropriate choice for planting on the coast. I think you could probably get those at 20-foot centers without too much harm in the long term, but 25-foot centers is probably a better call, and so I would support your arborist's instinct on that. Where we begin to get a little bit confused is the varying options and proposals that were presented tonight and in the staff report. I have a hard time supporting a non-one-to-one replacement. I don't think there's a lot of, well, I don't think there's any support for that within the code itself. We have made exceptions in the past, and not capitally exceptions, but lowercase exceptions, where there wasn't room. I mean, we did it with the skate park, where the applicant came forward. They had to remove 11 trees, 13 trees, 7 trees, something like that. And there's, you know, it's now a skate park. There's not room for trees, and so they were able to work with the city, and the city owning the land made a difference. That a lot of those trees that were removed ended up becoming street trees in downtown, in and around downtown, and up and down on Main Street. So I certainly support the different locations, not replanting these in the same place. But I would have a hard time supporting a reduction in the quantity. I think giving the applicant some leeway on the time frame is reasonable. I'm not entirely sympathetic to the cost reasons. I mean, if you can't afford the project, you shouldn't take on the project. But considering that there is a health and safety aspect, I think a time frame, an extended time frame for replacing these trees once they're removed is fair and is appropriate. Just to be clear, because there are different numbers. We're talking about 81 trees. Is that correct? 81 trees to be removed, and thus 81 trees per the code would need to be replaced. Is that right, Scott?
Yes, that's correct, and those numbers are based off the numbers that are shown in the Arbor's report.
Okay, so I see 76 and then 72.
Okay.
No, go ahead, Wes.
I got a few questions, few issues, and I'm going to ask legal the question too. You know, just like John Evans said on the lot, you know, being a very strange and, you know, certainly allow variances here. Seems to me that the one-for-one was designed for maybe homeowners or small areas. It was not designed for a situation like this, where, you know, 76 trees or a golf course or what have you, kind of thing. So I'm trying to question whether we can make policy here as a planning commission, or whether we have a legal constraint that in effect says, it says one-for-one, and therefore we're required to do a one-for-one.
That's correct. So it says 1-for-1. There's no process for variance, and at this time,
Okay.
you can't do the policy, but maybe in the future you could.
Now, I'm also looking over here, it says, you know, included in this project is 140 New Zealand broadleaf trees. I mean, those are trees, so in terms of, are we not to count that number because they're not trees or not the required trees, or what's the legal definition on that? Because that, yeah.
Mr. Chair, if I may, staff did do a little research on the New Zealand broadleaf, and there is some ambiguity whether, you know, some people call it a tree, some people call it a shrub. What we determined was, you know, off our research is, for the most part, it's a shrub. Additionally, the applicant is proposing 15-gallon for the replacement of those, but the code actually requires a 24-inch box, so there is a size change as well. So, yeah.
So again, just to make sure that I can put this into, you know, context, you're saying that there's no legal way that we can grant an exception because that's not required in the code, and two, that the New Zealand broadleaf trees are cannot be defined as a tree. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
Okay. So in terms of options we have, we are to apply the legal standard. Seems to me that the only option we have is with the time, in terms of how much time we can give the applicant in order to meet the standard of the ordinance. Am I correct?
Yes.
All right. Okay. All right.
Concur with that.
Thank you.
It's, I think, sort of a year ago, 9 months ago, where we had a tree removal application for 4 heritage trees, and these trees, they were up on in the Kehoe, Casa del Mar neighborhood, where the applicant had 4 metrosideros, or lollipops, like 20 feet tall, but they had been pruned for years, and they were 12 inches in diameter, and thus they were all heritage trees. And because they were in good health, we couldn't make the findings that he could remove them, even though they were barely, but still heritage trees. I think this is the same quandary, and I think this is something we've been working at for a couple of planning commission meetings, and we'll be doing so on our next item, is trying to put a heritage tree, or really putting together a urban forest management plan that is scaled and appropriate for large properties with lots of trees, single-family homes with 1 tree or no trees, and everything in between. But I don't think we have the leeway to change the number of trees that are allowed at this point.
So just to help with my, just so I understand exactly what we're going to do. On Miramontes Point Road, there's kind of a place from Highway 1 down to where Wingfoot Road comes around is one stand of trees there. And so whatever that number of trees, so I completely understand and agree with the arborist report that the density of trees is important, and if it's too dense, they don't grow well and they don't look good, and et cetera, et cetera. And so are we we sort of handcuffing the golf course that along that frontage road there's going to be, because of the number, the one-to-one replacement, those trees have to go on that?
No.
Okay,
No.
so we could, I'm just trying to get.
Yeah, so.
So that could be what the applicant
Absolutely.
is requesting, and there's maybe some time or other to try to figure out how all the rest of it kind of fits in there, and am I incorrect in assuming that as we go through time, if, for example, our ordinance changes a little bit, maybe they can reapply, and if they're in the middle of their 3 or 4 year cycle of replacing trees, or?
Well, I would imagine that that's conditioned on the application at the time, and so depending on what the outcome tonight, they would probably have to amend that application or come back on that same application based on whatever were to change in the future. But my understanding, and staff can correct, is that the area between Wingfoot and Miramontes Road is where 76 of the 81 trees are going to be removed, and the applicant is proposing replacing those with 36 trees at that spacing and with that shrub planting. And another 10 trees in the median island off of Wingfoot Road, and the remaining trees at various other points. There you go. Which seems appropriate.
So I guess the only question I have is, if we stick to the, how much time do we give is the question, and what conditions can we place on that? If we say, hey, this needs to be done within the next 2 years, but if you can't do it within the next 2 years for financial reasons, can we put a condition that you have to come back to the city with a plan? I mean, what kind of flexibility can we have here?
Well, they would be in violation, and then it would be a.
So if I could, through the chair, I would hesitate to start to make value judgments on financial capacity. Because that sets a really, really dangerous precedent as we move along on any other application and project that you're dealing with. Beyond that, as an association, they may actually do assessments against the properties. There's many ways that you can finance the work. I'm not saying they should. I'm not saying they have to, but there are ways that they can deal with it. But from the perspective of how that and how we approach projects on financial reasons, it's a very dangerous path to head down. It really should be based on whether it makes sense as a good policy to say, let's let them extend the time for this. So
Okay,
that's all I'd say.
Thank you. Diseased trees or not, they're striking when you drive down Miramontes Point Road. I mean, I don't know. It's not all, I mean, I'm not a tree expert like my fellow commissioner over here, but it is going to make a drastic change to the environment. I think a lot of people are going to be shocked when 81 trees are removed, and we're talking about 4-year time frame potentially to replace them. I think 2 years seems reasonable, but that's, especially given the scope of the impact. It's unfortunate that this has been put off so long, that now you're in a situation where you have to take such drastic action all at one time. But it's kind of outside of our control. Allison?
wasn't on. This feels a little, interesting because we're dealing with a large project and a large number of trees. And it's obvious that you're not gonna replace them one for one on the same site. And of course, you can find other land likely within Ocean Colony that you could find homes for the other trees, but it just feels weird to not yet have that plan, even though that will go to someone in planning in the future. I don't know if you, as the commission, has dealt with recently any large, like, tree replacement projects.
I can't think of one at this scale.
Yeah,
that
it's
we've
a
done.
lot.
I mean, well, we had, when the school district came to the planning commission for the Hatch school improvements, I think they had 90-odd trees that were to be removed. Most of them were heritage trees. And they had incomplete specifics on the location of all their proposed replacements. It wasn't a very clear plan. But it was probably a little bit more buttoned down than this, but it's also, even though it's a big site, it's a much smaller site than the areas covered by the applicants association.
The chair, and there is nothing that would preclude you from adding a condition that the replacement plan come back for you to review. It's certainly available to you. We were taking a little less strict and stringent approach to that, but if you feel that as the three of you feel that that's important enough to come back and review that replacement plan, you can feel free to place an additional condition requiring that replacement plan to come back for your review, and you could put a time frame on when that comes back as well. So that's available to you. The ordinance is extremely, I will say this one of the nice things about having this chance and opportunity to look at this is I think it's a great segue into the conversation about the challenges and why we were talking about some of the changes and recommendations on the ordinance itself, because of the very reasons that we're sort of fighting through some of these challenging issues tonight.
But I mean, in any case, it's going to come back. Maybe I took this away and it's not correct, but it's going to come back to you for
Sure.
for review. It doesn't necessarily have to come back to us, but no matter what, they've got to come back to you with a replacement plan. And
Yes.
okay,
It's again whether there's a desire to have a more public process for that review and approval. We didn't recommend it, but that is available to you.
you have an arborist on staff who can help.
We do.
I don't have any other questions. Do you have any other questions, John and Allison?
I think the golf course generally does a great job of the landscaping out there, and this is the second time in my tenure on the planning commission where we've had to forego what's practical with what's actually our ordinance, and we don't have a mechanism to change the ordinance tonight. So I feel bad about that, and that's where we are. And I really appreciate the trees you're putting in. I agree with Tom. Those are great deciduous coniferous trees that look good, and they're not scruffy pine trees.
So what do we want to do? 2 years, 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that, given what I've heard, our options are limited. We can always tell the applicant to come back when we have a new tree ordinance, but that's, who knows when
That's going to be.
Okay, that's one option, but we need to do something right now because of the emergency issues. It seems to me we have to follow the legal, the code that in effect says it's 1 for 1. So the options we have, number one, timing, and number two is whether we want to. I think one of the proposals is by them that they are first going to plant, let me see if I can get that, to immediately planting 36 Brisbane box trees. So, you know, the Mermonte Street will not be empty for long. I mean, that's it's the other trees to get to the 81 that might take a little more time. So I think the issue for us is, A, do we need to hear, you know, after the 36 trees, how many trees per year, how much time do you want to give? I think those are some of the things that we ought to discuss, you know, in terms of whether there ought to be something firm or something a little more wishy-washy on that. I mean, I have no problem granting, say, after 4 years. Yeah, it's very expensive to plant trees. So, but the question is, do we want to say you can plant 35 now and the rest of them in year 4, or, you know, should there be something that equal number of trees each year, so that by the end of the period, we're something like that. So those are some of the, I think, options that at least we have to put on paper. I guess we have a speaker there if you want to open up the floor again. So,
well, yeah, you know, even before before Scott pointed out that last clause was missing from the but no later than 3 years from the start of tree removal. I read the conditions, and 2 years seems like a comfortable time frame to find room for an additional 36, 35 trees. I would have no problem moving forward with the conditions of approval as written, not as amended, giving the applicant 2 years to replace all of the trees. Without the 3 years from the start of tree removal and 2 years from the time things get going seems an appropriate length of time to me.
I'm going to open it up for public comment. Did you have a comment you wanted to make? I'll always give them.
I mean, if
Directionally,
this
I'm
was
fine
any
with
other
that.
project, if this was somebody with 5 trees, you know, they'd have to have their 5 trees replaced and in by the time they got their occupancy permit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if the school district's going to have their 90 whatever trees replaced by the time they get occupancy. I understand this is not a single ownership. This is an association, and they have different considerations involved. But it seems like a fair way to address the issue as we would with any other applicant.
I'm going to open it up for comment from the applicant.
No, my comment was, even though our original application called for 36 trees, I had mentioned there that we can plant these trees on 20-foot centers, which is a little closer than we'd like, but that would get 45 trees in. Because even the other parks, we really are limited. In one of the parks, we'll actually have some legal issues because the park is in front of homes that face the ocean. And if we start planting 30-foot trees there, we're going to get into some legal battles with the homeowners. So we may not be able to plant as many trees in that park, for example, as what we'd like. So that makes it very tight. And you just hate to plant trees just for the sake of planting trees in different areas. But we can work out planting at least 45 trees initially and just make them closer together. So we are willing to amend that. And if that's the case, it is possible that over a 2-year period, but you know, overall we're looking at about an $80,000, $90,000 project to do all this. And that's why we have 5- and 10-year plans in Ocean Colony, so that the homeowners are not hit with any, you know, kind of assessments or anything else like that. So 2 years might be doable, but the problem is, can we promise that? I'm not so sure. And then the other problem is getting plans. I mean, we hate to go and get our landscapers. We have our landscape maintenance people here tonight, but, you know, we can't, you know, go ahead and spend $4,000 and $5,000 on landscape plans, which are going to be 2 years or 3 years down the road. That's just not a good way of expending our money. You know, it'd be easy if we were our own homeowners and we could make our own decisions, but we're kind of making decisions for 500 different families.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, you know, my response to that would be to staff. I wouldn't expect staff would require full landscape plans denoting each individual location of each 81 of these trees. I think the more general approach taken in the application of planting these at you know, even if you go 40, yeah, right, there you go. That's a schematic plan, and I wouldn't expect that staff would want to see much more than that. And I'm seeing nods, so, and I don't think that needs to come back to us. I think staff is well and truly capable of weeding through those plans.
I would agree. I'm inclined to either go to the as written or to 3 years. I don't know if anybody has any consensus.
And there is still some flexibility in the conditions of approval, because it says replacement within 2 years of the date of the removal of the last tree. So does that, I mean, out of
could
all
remove
these
80 of them.
80, like, which trees are there? How you want to stagger this?
If you look in the staff report itself, Scott indicated that we were recommending that change.
That
be
does
reflected.
clarify.
Okay.
That clarifies that, because we saw the flaw in
Yeah,
that,
Yeah.
which was that you just don't kill the last tree off,
No
and then
later than
your
3
your
years.
your next 100 years you don't have to replace.
Yeah.
So,
I think the 3 years.
and we know that's not the intent, but
I think we should just go with the 3 years and give them a little more flexibility.
Yeah. And I don't, since there's no plan specified, I think if the applicant wants to plant 45 trees at 20-foot centers, then go for it. You know, please don't plant them any closer together, but if that helps the process and helps the applicant get a jump start on that, then I would support that.
So I assume the applicant has the potential to not necessarily plant them symmetrically, so you're driving down the highway like a fence post, and some could be closer together and some could be further apart, and that might also accomplish your goals. And I mean, we're not saying they have to be, I mean, there's,
We're saying you have to work it out with the city staff.
figure all
and
that out.
I'm sure you'll come up with a good plan. You want it to look as good as any of us. You drive there every day. So. All right. Can I get a motion? We need to make sure we get this one right.
I'd move to approve PDP 16067, an application for a heritage tree removal permit for the removal of 76 heritage Monterey pine trees between Winged Foot and Miramontes Point roads, and 5 heritage Monterey pine trees within the roadway island on Winged Foot Road. That's APN 066-550-010 and 066-452-999. Based on the findings and evidence contained in Exhibit A of the draft resolution, and subject to the conditions of approval contained in Exhibit B, with the correction as noted to B3 in the staff report.
I second that.
Get a voice vote?
Commissioner DeBon,
Yes.
Commissioner Conroy,
Yes.
Commissioner Evans,
Yes.
Vice Chair Reamer,
Yes.
and Chair Hernandez.
Yes.
Motion approved per the motion.
3 a.m. local time, so,
How about if we
take a little
break till
short
9?
break?
How about that?
Okay, that's fine.
Do that?
Yep, 5 minutes. Since I've asked this item to be put on here, I've heard a number of folks in private and in public meetings talk about the desire to bring the park back. So I wanted to bring it as a discussion item to see if there's agreement amongst my fellow commissioners that we should have some flavor or the city council to bring that back, or if you guys think this is just a bad idea, we should leave it as is. But my general sense is we seem to be spending a lot of time. We have an informal process we've implemented today, or that we use to get architectural review. But I think in a lot of projects, the architectural design gets short shrift, and I think we could probably do a better job if we can reconstitute ARC in a way that takes into account some feedback about things that could be improved from previous implementations of ARC and some of the other things we've done over the last few years.
Rick, before I know this is a discussion item, but it's our discussion, we did receive a green sheet, and I think that your discretion, we should open that up just to let other people have their say.
I think it's a great idea, especially since staff has already given its presentation. Colin Eisen, I have a green sheet. Please step to the podium. Green sheet. We'll open it up for public comment.
All right, thank you, Paulette Eisen. I just want to voice my support for an architectural review committee. I think I've noticed that other cities have it, and when I first saw it, I thought, yes, definitely, this is something that Half Moon Bay should have, because as I've come to some of these planning commission meetings, definitely a big factor in a lot of applicants' projects has been, especially some of the designs that they've put forth, have not taken into consideration that we're here on the coast, and the kind of materials that are needed to be used to build properly in an area like this, where you're constantly battered by wind and moisture, and that requires certain kinds of materials that are different than, if you're living in the desert. So that's one thing, but the other thing is every town that is charming, that has appeal, that has style, and is especially a tourist town like ours is, one of the big factors that makes it charming is the architecture. And it's one thing for our natural resources, which is one aspect, but in the town itself, to have that buildings that have some artistic merit. Especially, I was interestingly enough talking to people today who were talking about artists here in the town, and we don't really have that reflection. We have a lot of artists, but the town itself, when you come into the town, doesn't really reflect that this is a very big artists community. And there's some wonderful buildings here. Some, anyway, and it would be nice to have almost like a book of the buildings that are especially, eye-catching, appealing, charming, and have that as kind of a template for people who are applicants coming in to give their people, their architects, ideas of how to fit in with the design, with our best designs. So I think an architectural review committee is absolutely something that we should move forward with. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to close public comment and bring it back to my commissioners. And I'll thank you for your eloquent comments.
Yeah, they're obviously I've been on this commission for about 10 years, and I think at least 7 of those we had ARC. But one of the things that came up, and I think at least Tom was with us during this time, I'm sure about John, there's an issue about what exactly are architectural guidelines? I mean, what do we have that in effect, is this, well, I'm feeling this way this week or this way that week? And I think we actually developed some guidelines. There's a book. I'm not sure how formal that one is at this point in time. I know that we approved it in effect, but I'm not sure where it stands as being something formal at this time. So I mean, there are issues here. I think there ought to be an architectural committee that, but I think there needs to be something that has substance to it. Not, well, it should look like that building, or should look. I mean, there needs to be something that in effect says, here's my project, and we actually talked about a checklist on projects that we could use, because there wasn't an ARC. That I haven't seen that recently, for example. But those are some of the issues that I think are important before we just go ahead and ask for the city council to appoint an ARC.
To the,
John, did you have something to say?
well, just to the chair and through to the commission, the subject matter was simply an interest to formally ask the council to reconstitute. Staff has, as indicated briefly, in that we have some thoughts about the Architecture Review Committee and how, if it's reconstituted, how it might form and how it might function. And part of that, I think, is part of the responsibilities might be to establish architectural standards and guidelines for future. But that's, again, for something after the council has made a decision as to whether they want to reconstitute in some form or fashion. So I think the details are certainly something that we need to talk ultimately to the community, to you, to the council about, and we obviously have some thoughts about it. But I think the bigger policy issue this evening is simply there's a desire, I think, among the community members and among at least some commissioners to reconstitute that. We agree that probably the largest struggle that the Planning Commission in my short tenure here has been dealing with the architectural review side of the design review and the project review process, and meshing that with a very late process and a very late review kind of that work when it feels like it's baked. Yeah, in terms of like in lateness, but feeling like the projects are already baked and you have no input at the point when they come to you as a hearing item. That's what we sense from you and within the community a bit as well. So.
I think, thanks, John. It's helpful. To your point, Les, I mean, I've been through the ARC process as an applicant, and while I received favorable treatment, one of the applicants who went before me received what appeared to my layman's eyes to be willy-nilly treatment at the hands of ARC. And I don't know exactly what happened there, but it seemed like a fine project to me, and there were no standards. So I think if I could step back a little and say, you know, not necessarily, hey, let's just get ARC up again, but ask City Council to develop a plan or have city staff develop a plan to reconstitute ARC. And, you know, if they want us to provide feedback on what that looks like, happy to do it. But I think it would be nice, so since we keep running up against this, what I would ask for is City Council to authorize a plan for reconstituting ARC.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to emphasize the word plan. You know, the ARC is really a subset of the Planning Commission. So, I mean, it seems to me that the process is something that we need to be involved in, because we're going to say yes or no to that. So I think I'm not sure how long we think a process like that will take, but I'm certainly in favor of that process going forward.
I think, Les, just to follow up on that, I think technically ARC was an advisory body. And what some of the benefits of the Architectural Review Committee was that it allowed a much more informal, I mean, even though they were structured and you know, Brown Act meetings and whatnot, they allowed for a bit more informal. They weren't workshops, they weren't discussions, but they allowed the applicants at an earlier stage to begin to explore and to get more feedback on what is expected from them when it came to the ultimate decision makers, which would be the Planning Commission and ultimately the Council or Coastal Commission, or whatever. I have a long familiarity with the ARC, as my employer was the longtime chair of the Architectural Review Committee. So even though I wasn't attending all these meetings, I felt like I was kind of a part of it. And I had attended, and I had presented projects to the Architectural Review Committee here. And I think for an applicant, it has a benefit, and I think it has a benefit to the Planning Commission. Even if the Planning Commission thinks that the decision reached by the ARC was nonsense, it's more data, it's more background, it's another perspective, and it helps hone the discussion when it does ultimately come to the Planning Commission stage. I think when the ARC was disbanded in 2011, I think it was a mistake. I understand the reasons, and there were a couple of reasons that were stated at the time, and I understand why the council made the decision that they did. I don't agree with that decision. I think any new version of the ARC would have to have it will necessarily have a different mandate and will have a different approach. The 1998 through 2011 ARC was a bit, did not have the support of a document that we worked on over the last couple of years, the single-family residential design guidelines. They were the single-family residential design guidelines, and thus those guidelines changed based on the vicissitudes of the people at the time who were interpreting the code. I don't know if you guys have noticed, Les, you've been on here longer, the number of single-family projects that are coming to us now versus 4 years ago. Seems like it's less because staff has the guidelines, and finally getting the Coastal Commission approval of those 2010 changes made a big deal, made a big difference too. But it has cleaned up that process, and we're doing less single-family work at this level than we were in the past. And that's I think that's to everyone's benefit, certainly the applicants. One of the reasons that council wanted to disband the ARC was they had received a lot of pushback, possibly from the person that was there at your meeting, Rick, but from others that it was slowing the process, or it was arbitrary. And it probably was, but it probably wasn't any slower or any more arbitrary than any other city in the Bay Area that has an architectural review process. Ultimately, it's the council's decision and how they set up the program for an architectural review body. My recommendation to the council, and I don't know how specific you're going to get, or if you're going to work with staff and then bring a letter back for everybody to sign off on, I would hope you would be that things like multifamily houses, commercial properties, public projects, institutional things, school projects, things that are not R1 zoned properties have that level of architectural review. Projects within the downtown corridor have that level of review. I think our single-family guidelines and the work that staff has done and at the director level to approve single-family homes based on our design standards is probably adequate at this point.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I'm happy to draft something with staff. You all right? Fine. Happy to draft something with staff and bring it back for review by everybody. Make sure we're good with it. Any other feedback?
Well, you're preaching to the choir with me, so it
check.
Sorry, but however this goes forward, any project that has a good, talented designer is going to welcome legitimate critique of their project at the early stages. And so the challenge is to us, how do we set that up? So we have a legitimate early critique. And then what I feel I need as a planning commissioner is like our staff reports have recommendations based on research or professional reports or whatever. It's just another component of the staff report that it's been looked at, and we are just then making sort of technical judgments here at this level, and not this, here's my project, how do you like it? And say, well, it's terrible, just start over again. That's not a legitimate critique process for the professional designers. And for the amateur designers, if they can be great designers, good for them, and if they can't, they deserve to get kind of hammered on by whatever mechanism we have to embellish our community and make it as beautiful as it is. So.
Yeah, those are good points. So I guess it would be 3 people who are already on the planning commission, and that's the thing, we
I
already
would
have
hope not.
5.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
think
that's what I was
the
curious
proposal
about.
would be, what we did before was,
Yeah,
it was a
2 people.
committee of 5 people who were separate from,
Okay.
It was 3. It
Three.
was,
It was
the way it was
6.
comprised was an architect, or I don't know if it was a licensor, someone who's an architectural profession, a landscape or civil engineer, and a layperson. That's how it was set up at the time.
I think our staff is going to be able to come up with lots of examples and other communities that have done this, and everybody complains and moans and groans about communities like Palo Alto and how hard it is to get permits, but then they, just admire how beautiful it is. So you can't have it both ways.
Yep.
And I look forward to what examples have been working in other areas and how they conform and how it works out for them.
great. I will take direction from my fellow commissioners and come back with a draft for your feedback at a future planning commission meeting. I'd like to, do I need to make a motion? I'd like to, so.
Oh, yeah. I move to authorize the chair to work with staff to submit a letter to the city council asking the council to consider reestablishment of an architectural review committee.
Second?
A roll call?
Commissioner DeMond,
Aye.
Commissioner Conroy,
Yes.
Commissioner Evans,
Yes.
Vice Chair Reamer,
Yes.
and Chair Hernandez.
Yes. I'm fading fast, so.
I know, you're,
Go.
it's a long flight and a long day. We to the next item? I'll turn it over to Jill. Jill, I said very nice things about you. You can watch it on tape before, and welcoming you aboard and everything, and you were off getting the other memo, so thank you for doing
You
that.
hearty hip hip hooray.
Jill was kind enough to assist in this and will be taking certainly a more prominent lead role. She's put together, I promise you, a very short presentation, and we're not really expecting a significant amount of conversation tonight, but it's really sort of to set the table for how we proceed into the next month or 2 months or 3 months into potential revisions. Thanks.
All right. Good evening. Chair Hernandez, Planning Commissioners, happy to present a 6-slide presentation to you on the Heritage Trees Ordinance. And, I always do.
No, it is.
You turned it off.
There you go. You're good.
Okay, I am good, okay. So, this item is an update from the Planning Commission's October discussion of the city's Heritage Trees Ordinance. Staff brought the item to the commission at that time because there was interest in reviewing the city's process for permits for larger properties involving multiple trees, such as the Old Ocean Colony application that you saw earlier tonight. The commission's discussion went well beyond that scope, and we have tried to group and summarize your comments by category, provide responses as appropriate, and conduct research to bring you more context and perspective. Highlights of the topics touched upon at the October session include those listed on our slide. 2 of those topics were really broadly and deeply covered, the definition of heritage trees and the subject of replacement trees. The packet report presents approaches to both of these topics, including Planning Commission ideas and options from staff discerned through research as well as our own past experience in other communities. We are happy to go into detail on any of this if you wish tonight, or respond to commission questions at the end of the presentation. The packet also presents additional context for tree stewardship in Half Moon Bay, including the local coastal program, which addresses significant plant communities as part of the Visual Resources Protection Standards. So it's important to remember that this spans beyond the tree ordinance itself. Next, for the general plan update, the first public draft conservation and open space element, which is being reviewed by the General Plan Advisory Committee at this time, It includes a section that we're calling Local Urban Forest. We are very eager to get feedback about this approach from the community and the advisory committee. And finally, we've had some additional thoughts about the crux of large-scale mature landscape maintenance. We appreciate and assume that landscapes will need to be rejuvenated over time. We can see that this may involve many trees in some cases, as well as other significant landscape features. We became interested in the prospect of longer-term phased plans for maintaining, replacing, and otherwise rejuvenating these areas. Large tree removals might occur over several years instead of all at once. Priority removals for dead, diseased, damaged, and potentially dangerous trees would be up front. The rest could be carefully planned to reduce impacts of large-scale changes. I have seen this in a couple other communities, and so we can certainly talk more about that. Then your memo continues to describe 4 different approaches, or basically scopes, to what an amendment to the city's preservation, the Heritage Trees Ordinance could include, and the focus for each. I'm just going to list them very briefly here. In a limited scope for an amendment, we would focus on this original topic, but sort of transfer it into this concept of this mature landscape maintenance planning idea. In an expanded scope, we would suggest addressing a bit more, but not as comprehensively as what you might see in San Mateo County or Saratoga examples, which we have provided as attachments in your report for some context, and I can talk more about that in a bit. For a comprehensive update, we really would need some more time to get to that. There's other moving parts and pieces that would be very helpful to supporting a comprehensive update, including as part of the capital improvement program, an inventory that is going to come forth. I believe it's for the city's street trees in particular. Also input about the local urban forest concept in the Plan Half Moon Bay project, and a number of other things that we would want to talk to you about. And then finally, another way to go is to focus instead on implementation using the ordinance that you have at hand. We understand that there's been concerns about ensuring replantings are done in a timely and successful fashion, and so that in and of itself is a bit of work as well. So, before concluding, we just want to note what else is in the packet report, because we do have some folks in our audience as well who might not have seen all of the items, and we'd encourage you to go take a look. The existing heritage tree ordinance is provided for reference. Very good attachment too. San Mateo County's, basically it's a white paper about their considerations for which trees should be protected in different circumstances throughout the unincorporated portions of the county. This was produced by them for a comprehensive update that they are preparing for the county's tree ordinance. They have a task force. This is going on for months and months, so it's just a much bigger scope than what we originally were looking at. But they've developed a lot of good materials, so we'd like you to know about that as a resource. We've also have excerpts from our own zoning standards that I already mentioned on the local coastal program, as well as Saratoga's tree ordinance. I looked at about 10 different ordinances in advance of this session and know that Saratoga's was cited at your last meeting, and so of course looked at that one as well. And agree, it is especially highly detailed. It's rather beautifully structured and quite impressive as a source. We wouldn't necessarily say that it is a model for Half Moon Bay unless you think that this is the level of detail that you'd like to get into, but it is a really excellent resource for us to take a look at. In summary, The item before the commission is discussion and direction regarding the city's heritage tree ordinance. Let us know if you have questions, and then we're hoping that you can possibly make a motion tonight to give us some direction about what kind of scope you'd like to pursue, or if you would like us to prepare additional materials so that we can continue to research the topic together in public forum like this over time.
Thank you, Jill. Are there any questions for Jill? I see none. I'm going to start with Tom again, looking in your direction.
Okay. Thank you for including Saratoga's ordinance. It is really outstanding. The reason that I brought up Saratoga's ordinance in the last couple times we talked about this is for one section in particular, and it's when they talk about valuation and replacement value. When you want to remove a tree, a heritage tree in Saratoga, you need to perform an arborist report. And there is a method that arborists use to provide a valuation for that tree, a dollar amount, what that tree is worth. It might be $19,000, it might be $84,000. It's a range depending on the health, the species, its chance of survival long term. And the way Saratoga's replacement works is that you can, it's not, our heritage tree ordinance is 5 paragraphs. It's not one for one, you remove a heritage tree, you replace a heritage tree. It's, you remove a heritage tree and you have to replace it with enough value, tree value, in order to get up to that dollar amount. And so a new 36-inch box tree might be given, well, in Saratoga is given a valuation of $1,500. A 24-inch box tree is $500. Occasionally they let you add in 15 gallons for one thing or another. A lot of it is up to their tree czar, a woman named Kate Bear, who is really, really amazing. Both she and Dave Doctor in the city of Palo Alto are the two arborists in the Bay Area that are responsible for writing and being the resources for all tree protection up and down the coast. They're both great resources. And so I really like that valuation approach because it gives flexibility. Because they also, it's not their preference, but part of that, hitting that valuation is contributing funds to a city, what do they call it? They call it they have a name for it, but there's a city tree fund for replacing street trees or adding street trees or park trees and things like that. It's certainly not the city's preference. If you remove a heritage tree, the city wants you to replace the value of that tree on that property. But in places where that's impractical or impossible, they allow this other avenue to provide funds up to that valuation to be used at the city's discretion for tree replacement. Now, I don't think that approach on every heritage tree in the city is appropriate. One of the things we talked about in our last meeting and is mentioned in the staff report is different classes of trees. There are some trees that we want to protect. The 12-inch Metrosideros, may be worthy of being replaced at a 1-to-1 rate, but they're not worthy of having a $19,000 valuation. And I think the staff report mentions oaks, cypress, madrones. If there is a madrone tree within the city limits, I would be shocked, within the urban city limits. Yeah, hopefully, right? But I think it's unlikely. But the way the San Mateo County document lists ranges, if it's a Doug fir that's greater than 60 inches in diameter, that might be worth it. Just having a class of, you know, these are the trees that we really want. We think these are the trees that are critical to our urban forest in Half Moon Bay, to our coastal environment, then these are the ones we want to protect. Then there's this other class that may just be protected trees. Palo Alto breaks it into heritage trees and protected trees. Where you want to remove a protected tree, well, then that's simple. You have a rubric. It's a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 or whatever. It's also critical, and we talked about this, I think, 2 meetings ago on trees, is that replacement trees receive protection. And so Palo Alto does this, and I think Saratoga does this too. If a tree is designated on a plan as a replacement tree, then that tree receives protection even at a 3-inch caliper, at a small size. That is a designated replacement tree that is a protected tree. And so you kind of have this 3-class structure. That approach to rewriting the heritage tree ordinance falls into the comprehensive update category, I suspect. In my mind it does, because there's no document within the LCP that's really, there's little things here and there, but there's nothing that talks about the critical nature of an urban forest in Half Moon Bay. And so I think it would be difficult to find common ground between our current document and any proposed change like this, such an aggressive comprehensive change, doing something like this, without having the background, the grounding, or working in partnership with the general plan update. And so, you know, maybe we do what we can now with an eye to looking toward a more comprehensive update in the future, if, you know, it's not just me, if that's what the community and future planning commissions and council decide is an appropriate avenue.
That makes a lot of sense, and I also wanted to thank Jill and staff for doing all the homework, pulling all this stuff together. It's really helpful background. I agree that this kind of strikes me as, if we want to get to what Saratoga or Palo Alto are doing, that would be a comprehensive change, and we'd have to do a lot of work. I think there may be some surgical things that can be done, and we've identified some of those. And I think, yeah, I think that's, it needs, the comprehensive does need to be done with the general plan though, and I don't see a way around it. And I guess the question then would become, well, what surgical things could we do in very limited scope that makes sense? And I'm not sure we want to dig into all of that, but I think that would be directionally what I would say we should probably think about. John or Les or Allison?
So it seems like that it is a 2-step process, that there may be some things we can do in an interim before we can do a comprehensive update. And to me, there's some different categories. We're still, I think we could have a preliminary, better definition of what heritage trees are without exhaustive work to just identify on the coast what these trees are and what actually grows here. And then there probably are some specific trees, like I know there's, next to our house, there's in the city right-of-way is a walnut tree. And I don't know how old it is, but that walnut tree is an oval trunk, you know, up at chest height. And it's 5 by 8 feet is the diameter of that trunk. So I think it's taken a while for that tree to grow there. So it's not probably, someone would think that there's a walnut tree on the coast, you know, so it's kind of odd. Somebody planted it at some point. What I'm getting to is that there's several facets that the comprehensive plan will probably take on that have more to do with replacement and trimming and appropriateness and that kind of stuff. But I think we're right away kind of still trying to deal with what do you do when someone cuts a tree down? And then they say they look for forgiveness after they've done that. And so, and it seems like, and I just think I'll be a squeaky wheel trying to keep this in the language, is that a permit to cut down a tree ought to be really inexpensive. I mean, like $10 or $20. But the fine for doing it ought to be just exorbitant. It means maybe several $1,000s. So that the people, because if you have a large tree, like a large fir tree, something like that, someone's not going to cut that down by themselves. They're going to hire someone to do that. And we already have the ordinance that we have to have licensed, business licensed people to do that work. And so anybody that's in business that comes to the city and says, hey, a permit's only $20. But man, if I get caught cutting down the wrong kind of tree, it's going to be really expensive to me as the person that takes out the permit. So that's probably a pretty quick way. I don't have our fee schedule, but it seems like that's something we can easily deal with, you know, the permitting costs and the penalties for not having permits. And and the more complicated permits are, the less people want to do it. And then for the few people that want to cut down one of our really nice trees, well, shame on them, and we ought to really have a way to work with that. So I agree that the comprehensive report we can't get at. And Jill, this is just fabulous. This report and the research for everything here was easy to see and easy to read through and overwhelming. Yeah.
This is a lot of good information. One thing is, you know, the coast will never be Saratoga and Palo Alto because it's, you know, very different climate. You still have that issue of salt and wind, and it's just not as warm. But I can definitely see the reason to encourage good street trees, which are, you know, going to be usually more ornamental in nature, but things that will help, that will be water-wise. And I really like the idea of the tiered, you know, supporting the best trees, you know, California natives, that type of plan. And I also, I did like the idea of local urban forest, because that's kind of what we're getting at. It's like we're putting in a few more trees to help make the area more livable, even though they may not have historically been here, though some, such as random walnut trees, you know, planted 80, 100 years ago have been. But, you know, it is an interesting climate, and we do want trees, but we also want them to do well and still have all the great environmental benefits.
So what I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it'd be great if we had better definition around what our preferred trees are, and so work on cleaning that up a little bit in the short term, and then consider the permitting process with a substantial penalty for not getting a permit if you cut down a tree, and then looking towards a general plan for a more comprehensive, you know, tree policies around urban forestry and guidance. I think that's what I'm hearing. Is that
How does that fit into this timeline for the general plan?
I'm not sure how to answer your question yet. Let me, may I please ask a few questions? Okay, thank you. Would you like us to also, I heard the permitting process and I heard the better definition. We made a suggestion about perhaps lowering the threshold for some species in terms of their size. For example, for oaks and cypress. That would be a very simple approach to differentiating between a couple species, not to the level that I think you might be interested in the long term. Is that of interest to you? Is that along the lines of what you were looking for a short-term approach?
I would think, in my opinion, if that can be accomplished as part of a short-term change, then certainly it would be something that I could support.
Okay, and then we will look at the permitting process. Did you want us to include this new approach to mature landscape maintenance on larger properties. You saw a draft for kind of an annual approach, but it really didn't get at some of the things that you were bumping into, for example, tonight with your applicant when you're trying to think through how to do some more phasing and have a little more flexibility. I don't know how well we can do that, but we have some ideas and we do have some examples from other cities. And since that was what initiated the conversation, I did want to circle back and see what your interest was in that area.
I think I could get behind that, but
Okay.
I'm not sure in terms of the priorities, like that might take a little while longer to cook, but you know,
Okay.
you guys are,
Okay.
it's really,
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see the language, you know, I mean, I think whatever we can pick off surgically,
Right.
you know, as
Right.
kind of head towards this more comprehensive solution.
We have seen ordinances where the term heritage tree is used quite a bit more exclusively to trees that you're especially valuing, and that the other trees where you may have this more standard trunk diameter like we have right now, we would call those protected trees. And so they are protected, just as you also mentioned a replacement tree could become part of that definition. So that's something that I've worked with before, and I wonder if that is interesting to you or a concern, because you're used to calling all of these heritage trees, and I don't know if that's
No,
an important term in the community. I really don't
I
know.
think it's just the term that
Okay.
we use. I think that having different levels, different, you know, we call these things different because they're being treated differently.
Okay.
I think, you know, right now, was it 2011, the council wrapped all of the street trees on Main and Kelly into the heritage tree
Yes.
definition. And that means even the 2-inch diameter Mayten trees that had to be removed for the MacDutra Park improvements were considered heritage trees. Now, should that tree have been protected as a street tree on Main Street? Sure. Was it worthy of replacement? Sure. Was it a heritage tree? No, because it was planted 9 months before the park was demoed.
Right, right. But your public realm trees are so key, especially if they're street trees. So yes, I understand.
I don't think anybody's gonna cry
Okay.
if we change the definition of what a
Okay.
heritage tree is, and because we have really sloppy, not sloppy, it's really vague
Okay.
rules and laws, and I think
Okay.
it's arbitrary right now. I think we need to get away from arbitrary definitions to something that's much more meaningful to us.
Do we have a proposal at this point, or do we want, or
I
Jill, do
have
you
a
have any?
sense of what you're interested in. I would really like to take it back to the shop and see how far we can go with it instead of over-promising or under-promising tonight when I haven't had enough time to think this through and come back to you. Is that okay?
That's great.
Okay.
That's Jess.
What's
So-
if we're going to change the ordinance we already have, what's the process to do that?
Well, it's since it's not in the zoning ordinance, since it's outside, it's chapter 13? Right, it's 13, right?
Yeah, you're
No,
not.
it's 7, yeah.
It's not in 18.
It's not in 18,
Right,
so
right.
that means we can change it. As a city, it doesn't have to have coastal commission approval or anything like that. It's not part of the implementation ordinance, so it's at
Is it-
a city's discretion.
Is it action that we take as a planning commission and the city council may or may
A
not?
recommendation that we make to the council, and the
Okay.
council can approve it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Technically, since it's not part of 18, which is the zoning code, it would not require your recommendation and a formal action. We brought it here because we knew it was directly and very indirectly and directly related to land use and development. So we would still look for your input and continued recommendations and thoughts on it. But technically, unlike Title 18 item, this would not take a formal action of approval and blessing of that.
Forget us. Thank you.
I had-
Thanks, John.
That's a
Appreciate
worthwhile
it.
clarification. Thank you.
Okay, so
It's
the
what we
action,
do, sorry.
the action was to provide guidance. You said you've got sufficient guidance.
Yeah.
I think we're good. We'll
Thank
close
you.
the item. The next item is the second dwelling unit ordinance.
I am going to give you a brief oral update on this. The purpose of this update is to inform the Planning Commission that staff is aware of very recent state legislation that has the potential to affect the city's implementation of Half Moon Bay's second dwelling unit ordinance, which comprises Chapter 18.33 of the zoning ordinance, and which in turn acts as the city's local coastal implementation plan. The Commission may notice that other cities are updating their ordinances to conform to the new requirements established in AB 2299 and SB 1069. In fact, I saw an article in the newspaper today about the city of San Mateo working on their ordinance. These were just signed by the governor on September 27th, and they will go into effect January 1st, 2017. This is a very short implementation timeline for this type of planning and zoning matter. This reflects on the state's interest in addressing housing affordability in the short term. An increased inventory of second units is one means for doing so, and the new legislation eases the process and increases allowances for these types of units. We are currently assessing the applicability of these new measures for Half Moon Bay. The new law includes broad exemptions for the coastal zone, and all of this city is located within the coastal zone. If we find that we need to conform our ordinance, we will return promptly with revised code. Otherwise, we will confirm our process with you at a future time. We need to do a little more research on this because it's sort of an unusual circumstance for Half Moon Bay. Your code, also in your report, we went into a little more detail about a recent update to the code that it added an administrative review process that was approved by the Coastal Commission in 2014. So that was a good update that is actually fairly consistent with the new legislation. And that's what I have. If you have questions for us, please let us know.
I'm seeing no questions. We'll move on. Thank you, Jill.
Yep.
We've received your update. Move on to the next item. And last item, or second to last item on the agenda, which is the Plan Half Moon Bay update.
Yes. All right. Again, we have another brief oral report. We are happy to note, first and foremost, that all components of the policy documents for Plan Half Moon Bay are now available for community consideration as first public review drafts. They include the following: the local coastal land use plan, which has been out since late April, and the 5 general plan elements: the circulation element, conservation and open space element, healthy community element, safety element, and the noise element. All are being discussed in open forums before the General Plan Advisory Committee. In fact, we would like to plug that Thursday night of this week. We'll be back here in the EOC to meet with the GPAC at 6:30 p.m. and they will be taking up the noise and circulation general plan elements that evening. Back on November 15th, staff provided an update about Plan Half Moon Bay to the City Council. Council provided general direction, but also asked for continuance about some of the topics to a January session when our new council is seated. And that is a good segue to the Planning Commission's interest in your future role in support of the General Plan Advisory Committee, which I understand you were requesting this item so you could discuss that. As you know, one planning commissioner serves as a member on the General Plan Advisory Committee, and another member is assigned to be the alternate to that commissioner. Appreciating that there may be changes in the Planning Commission membership as a result of the recent election, we agendized this item to allow for your discussion about Planning Commission representation on the GPAC. We'll also come back and update you if we learn anything new or different from City Council after we see them in January. So we're here as a resource, and we'll try to answer your questions that come up from your discussion, and otherwise that concludes our Plan Half Moon Bay update.
Thank you, Jill.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Is there any vision yet as the general plan comes to the planning commission? Is this something we just sort of rubber stamp and say, okay, we've done, or any idea how that's actually going to function at our meetings?
We are, we're working through that process. We provided a fairly detailed, basically a Gantt chart to our city council showing a progression through the General Plan Advisory Committee and summarizing all of their comments, providing responses to those, and going through a process of revising the documents based on the input we received there for this transition from that part of the process, which has always been envisioned to conclude at some point and come into your forum where you will have an opportunity to hear about their recommendations, review revised draft documents, of course conduct additional public forum. You will hear new public comment. Maybe you'll hear comment that we've heard before, but you will get that context as well. And so no, there's it is not assumed that you will accept everything that we bring to you. We believe that you will have different perspectives and you'll want to talk about it, and you'll respond to the community members, and we're eager for that as well. So we're prepared to work with the GPAC and stay in that forum until that concludes at the right time, and then come here.
Is there any way to predict, will it change the demands of our calendar? We meet
yeah.
once a week or once a day or
Yes.
once a month, or it takes 10 years to get through us? Or
No, we're going to get this plan done. Talk to our new council member coming in today that we're going to get this plan done. We will need to walk through that with you and see what's realistic. It certainly depends on what's on your docket in terms of projects. I think it will be most appropriate to have general plan discussions as their own item the night that you're seeing those, and not load you up with projects and applicants along with that. So if you have a light month, then we can just work it into one of your regular meetings. If not, then we may have to have special meetings.
Too bad we didn't do that all summer when we weren't meeting. Oh, that.
Okay. And I'm sorry I can't be more specific yet. And we're going to get some feedback from council in January about really what that transition looks like from their perspective.
In January.
Yes.
And then they're gonna, appointments will be made in January, most likely, or end of December.
I don't know. Okay.
Ultimately, that will be a decision made, but the letters of interest have been put out and are out on the street. We anticipate the appointments on the January 17th meeting, as well as the update and direction on the general plan on that same night.
So, so there's no change in the makeup of the planning commission until the 24th would be the soonest. That's the, if I get that.
As it appears in schedule-wise, yes, that would be the soonest that would change.
I'll try to attend the GPAC meetings just as a backup, but I don't see any changes happening right now.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Great. Okay, I think we've got everything for that agenda item. Thank you for bringing that back to us. We've closed everything but the last item. Can I get a motion?
Well, I just have a communications.
Yeah. Oh yeah, communications.
Yeah. Bridget, for me, this is great.
I prefer this as well.
Okay.
This is a lot better. It's a lot easier.
Good.
to-
Okay.
And everybody's looking at the
I've
same
got 3. Okay.
Right,
All
I
right.
liked it better. Separate
you.
topic. This was the first time that I think we had more than one item on the agenda, and there's just not a lot of time to really go through everything before we meet, like between people working and doing things on the weekends. So, I mean, how is it determined? Like, how many items get on an agenda and all this, and allowing time for people to review stuff adequately?
Through the chair, I think the issue is less about the number of items and more about the timing of when you get the packet. And we apologize, it was later than we were hoping for and later than it really optimally should be to you. So we are going to continue to endeavor to improve in that, and with our stated objective to try to have it out the Wednesday evening or the Thursday morning at the latest point with this. And I know we've been saying this for a long time. So, and part of that has to be at some point where we say, you know, we're going to pull something off the agenda because it's just not ready to go. And it's hard when you have applicants and you have people that are expecting things and wanting to deal with it. But that's what we'll work through. And frankly, you'll, at some point you may, if you don't have enough time to deal with it, you're going to say, we're going to continue this item and smack us around a little bit publicly and apologize to the applicant, I guess. But that's kind of where we are. We recognize that that's unfair to you to force you to spend your weekends perhaps looking through a planning commission packet, and we don't want to do that to you. So we will endeavor to improve.
I also just wanted to note that you don't have another meeting before the end of the year, and so we did stack up these updates. So it was a little unusual in terms of doing that. So that's why. And so your reward is you don't have another meeting this month.
Jill, although, Jill, on John, that said, there are often items that are available online that if we had access to those, we don't necessarily have to start Friday night. We can start a week or so early. And if nothing else, alerting us to that fact, you know, will at least give us a heads up that said, hey, there's going to be a lot of items. I can start earlier, or if I'm on an airplane or, you know, somewhere, you know,
Perpetually on an airplane.
I can download this and read it or something along the way. So
Yeah.
if that's possible.
I would observe over the last year and a half, staff has done a tremendous job letting us know when there's a neg deck ready, even a draft neg deck when it goes out for circulation or something like that. So staff has done a really good job.
Yeah, so just keep doing that and do more of it.
Yeah.
It's
We're not going to give you an EIR in 3 days to look at it, so we promise that for sure.
I really prefer them on Tuesday or Wednesday as
And
well.
Bridget,
'cause
you know, this
Friday
is-
nights or
and
if something goes
we
wrong, I
really
have
don't
no
want to have
time.
Bridget out, you know, Friday evening delivering to you or taking that time. It's not fair to her either, so we'll work through that.
Excellent, thank you. All right, with that, can I get a motion?
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Can I get the ayes? Happy
Aye.
holidays.